Welcome everybody to our first episode of Building Better Software Fireside Chat. Today we've got some incredibly awesome guests that I'm excited to have here. So why don't we get started and just do a quick set of introductions. EJ, you want to get started?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. Hi, my name is EJ Bensing. I'm the VP of Engineering for Mark 43. We are the leading cloud-based public safety software provider. Two main products, CAD and RMS, both are primarily sold to local districts, and excited to be here today.
That's great. Thanks, EJ. Now, just to verify, you're not in jail right now, right? You look like you might be in a jail cell, and I just want to verify, is that part of your job? Do you have to work out of a prison or a jail cell, or is no? That's not required.
Not quite. This is the lovely conference room in my apartment building. First time. But yes, it does look like a nice gray void.
Okay, well that's good. I thought maybe it went along with the theme of your company, so appreciate that. Bobby, you're a professional, amazing YouTuber, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Bobby Davis. I run a coding boot camp and a consulting company called Cortex, and we build software for a lot of companies around the country, and we also are training people and bringing in that next generation of coders through our boot camp, Coder Foundry.
And you also have a book called Breaking the Code. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Breaking the Code is a book that I wrote this year. I was glad to launch it, but it talks about the 5 steps that you can go through to get your first software job after you did your learning. And so we go into a lot about marketing yourself as a developer, the things that you should put on your portfolio, the types of projects you should build. And then later in the end of the book, it's also talking about how do you manage your career later on in life. And I think we'll get into that a little bit today.
Okay, that's awesome. And so it's also kind of a prelude to what's going to happen when they get in their professional job, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to break the build, they're going to break code, they're going to cause problems, right? Is that right. What you also teach?
Well, we also try to tell them, like, in general, like when you're working for a software team, the way we run our boot camp is in 12 one-week sprints. And we always say that the biggest thing you can do as a software developer is have accountability to the dev manager, and then also have empathy in the things that they're going through. Like, they're just trying to sell products, and they're trying to get you to build the thing so they can sell it. And so, like, we talked about, like, accountability, transparentness, and it's like, all right, this is where I'm actually at in the process. Here's the problems I'm facing. And when you do that, I think you can be successful as a developer.
That's awesome. So it's perfect. Our talk today is a little bit about the developer experience, which is clearly apropos to your book and your experience, and also for myself and EJ, people that have been in the trenches, both on both sides, the developer and sort of the manager or the stakeholder. I thought today we'd maybe start off and talk a little bit about, according to a recent research from Harness, 52% of developers are happier since the pandemic began. I mean, what does that mean, EJ? Are your developers happy because they don't have to come to the office and they can stay? You can't look at them and ask them when it's going to be done, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely happier for several reasons. I mean, I don't think I've met a single person who liked their commute. So obviously, the commute from your bed to your desk is a little shorter than the commute into the office. And I think that's been pretty appealing to folks. The flexibility of working from home, definitely also nice as well. You can break up your day a little better. Also on the flip side, seeing a lot of our young parents in the company really enjoying the extra time they get to spend with their kids, and then also really not enjoying the extra time they have to kind of manage their so it's definitely been an interesting experience, and I think going to be something that's in our culture going forward, even after this whole pandemic thing.
So how do you help them manage sort of their sort of trade-off between always on, always feeling like they're at work now because their work is their potential, their home, and sort of the inherent burnout that come when you don't have a kind of clean separation. So while maybe commuting, as you said, is not super productive, on the flip side, sort of sometimes that break in going from one thing to the next, that context switch, at least personally for me, I find that context switch is sort of saying, now I'm going physically home. Even if I work later at home, it still feels like that switch. I mean, how do you manage that? How do you help your team members manage that?
No, I mean, that's a great question, Jeff, and not an easy one. I think certainly towards the beginning of this, when people were still getting used to it, that was very much a problem that we had to look into. I think the biggest thing that we've done is just really had the conversation, encouraged managers, directors to ensure that they're talking to their people and keeping an eye on that.
Right.
We've also had days off. We're just like, hey, everyone, we're taking this day off, or like one division will do that. Additionally, I think kind of leading in a way that exemplifies what you want your team to be doing. I do work a lot, but I also make sure to take vacation still, and have kind of blocks of time that are mine. And so making sure that kind of all the way down the line, people are seeing that, I think is very important.
That's great.
Keeping an eye on your developers.
That's great. Yeah, we usually give Saturdays and Sundays off, so that's really great. You guys, how about you, Bobby? I mean, how is this sort of not only changing your company and the sort of nature of how you deliver? Because you actually had physical centers before this, right?
Yes,
I mean, before
we
this
did.
pandemic. I mean, can you guys remember when people used to actually have buildings that used to go to? Now it's all YouTube and Zoom and things like that. So how are you helping, especially people that maybe just graduated college and are entering the workforce for the first time, and what's happening?
So we're seeing a lot of more remote opportunities for developers. And what I always tell a junior dev when they're coming in and say they're their first software job, I always lean towards, you should work in person, because if you can, and I get COVID and all those things, because you can learn a lot from those other senior mid-level developers that you can just bounce a question off of too. I think the one thing that gets juniors in trouble is they'll try to solve every problem on their own. And so EJ asked the junior dev, hey, can you fix this bug? And EJ's thinking that's going to take 3 or 4 days. I know he's not good, but he doesn't understand something, and he doesn't ask a question until 14 days later. And and then EJ could have solved it in 30 seconds, and the guy wasted 2 weeks doing it. So we try to get them to say, at the very minimum, you need to check in with your team lead if you're working remote every day, I think, at least daily, but you need to give them a status report every week and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what the problems I have. My VPN's not working. I've had devs that their VPN shut down and they were afraid to call the person they're working for. They'll think I'm an idiot. I'm like, no, it's probably because there's something on their end. You need to tell them that you can't communicate because you can't use your work. So, so I think communication is the big thing that we try to teach them through the boot camp. Now that we're running it totally virtual, now we live it now, because now we have Zoom calls and team meetings with 30 plus students, and they've got to tell us when they've got an issue with what they're doing so that we can help them overcome that and then keep coding.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, EJ, how do you communicate? I mean, how do your teams communicate? How do they kind of grapple with this, like Bobby said?
Yeah, I mean, we use kind of all different forms of technology to enable communication. We're on Google Hangouts a ton, lots of virtual meetings, and then kind of increasing the communication as well. Definitely from the process is crucial to keeping everybody on the same page. Especially, we've actually been fortunate enough to grow a lot during this time. So probably added about 20 engineers to the team, and getting them onboarded certainly has been an interesting experience. Because, a lot of the stuff that we mentioned there, new developers, even senior developers, are just kind of a little hesitant to ask for help at the start, and, getting them kind of not only working, but also kind of as part of the company, part of the culture, has certainly, again, been challenging, but I think we've got at least some idea of how to do it now.
Right. That makes sense. So where do we go from here? I mean, how does the developer experience change from here? I mean, let's say a year from now, there's sort of, things are, quote, back to, I don't know if they'll ever go back. Maybe that's a good question, but like, what happens from here? How do you think it's going to impact the sort of daily life for developers? Is this the new norm?
Definitely an interesting question. I think, as I was alluding to earlier, that remote's here to stay. That's true for our company. We're going a hybrid remote strategy. So we will need to kind of account for remote employees, teammates who aren't, sitting next to you in the long run. And I think that's a huge advantage both to our kind of developers as well as, our company. Lets us have a more diverse workforce, bring in people from all over the country rather than just kind of, in the places that we have offices. I see the conversation about remote work being taken much more seriously and best practices related to that. When this all started, I feel like there was, maybe it was, I forget who it was, has a book on remote kind of work and how they accomplish it. And that was one of the only resources I could find on like, how do you do this? And I think obviously this has forced us to have that discussion, learn how to do this, start figuring things out. So I think it's going to be a much bigger thing across the board,
Right. Yeah, what do you think, Bobby?
I think it's here to stay. I think that remote work's here to stay. The question that companies are struggling with is you have to resist the urge of saying, hey, if they're at home, they're not working, and how do we remain productive? How do we gauge that productivity? And then how do we gauge if someone's being effective or not? And I think what I've learned is we're using Microsoft Teams a lot. And one of the things that I find myself doing now is when I have a question, I'll just hit the little video chat button, and now I'm calling different people all day long and on video chat, and then we can screen share. And I think if you can allow people to say, hey, just call me whenever, instead of like trying to book time and schedule time, I think that can, because that's what happens in a cube world. You just get up and go talk to the network guy and say, hey, what's up with SQL Server 105? Like I can't get to it. And then he looks at it and goes, oh, okay, I changed the DNS here, and I'm going to get that going. And then that's real easy. And so now you have to give the tools in place and then allow that to happen. Because what can happen sometimes with programmers is we get in our cubby hole and we get in our cube and we don't want any interruptions. Like, just don't talk to me, period. And I'll tell you when I'm done. And so somehow we got to find that balance, but also allowing them to be productive.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing internally. We're all on Slack, not Microsoft Teams, but a similar thing is like we use the video calling, pretty much all throughout the day.
Right.
And people know sort of to put do not disturb, or you can see the icon if they're on another call. So it's sort of easy to sort of know.
Yeah.
And we've cut down dramatically in sort of like meetings, requirement to have meetings. So that's helped a lot. And it's also nice because the social side, right? Because you can turn cameras on and sort of see each other and talk through things.
Yeah.
Now, do you see a sort of a hybrid workplace, either one of you? So, like, I'll tell you, like, from my own experience, we were all virtual, like everyone in the world, since March. About September-ish, we had a number of people wanted to get back into an office. They were at home, they were lonely, they didn't have a good work situation or a good sort of setup situation with roommates and sort of physical, sort of location. And so we did end up opening back an office sort of optionally for anybody who wanted to kind of come in. And not everybody comes in. Some people go in every day. A few people come in once or twice a week, and then others have never even visited the place. So is that sort of the quote new normal? I mean, do you see that sort of being more people do? I mean, when does it make sense to have a physical location? When does it make sense to be completely pure virtual? And when is it sort of this hybrid?
I don't know. EJ can probably speak to. I think hybrid's good, because I do think what people don't understand, working from home, especially coding, can be super lonely. It's like, and you just wish you could talk to someone about the Mandalorian or something like that just came out, so like there's a lot of things that you want to, and you make friends at work too. And so part of that and building good company is culture. And it's hard to build friends when you don't know them totally through Teams or Zoom or Slack or whatever. So
that's right. I always call this sort of transactional, sort of
yeah,
relationships versus transactions, like the sort of Slack culture creates, if you don't know people, especially if they're distant or remote, it creates a very transactional culture, meaning I'm just going to talk to EJ when I need something or he needs something from
right.
me. Whereas when you're in a work culture, more traditional physical location is much more of a relationship based. We talk about, like you said, the Mandalorian. We talk about how terrible the new Star Wars is versus the old
Right.
Star Wars.
Exactly.
Bobby and I talk about that. And you talk about all these things that aren't sort of work, but they sort of bring fulfillment and sort of social nature that I think human beings crave. I mean, what do you think about EJ? Sort of how do you bridge that gap between sort of this very transactional, I just need it and I need to sort of get something done versus, hey, let's just talk, and sort of this cultural feeling that I don't want to bother EJ right now because I know he's heads down. And so I sort of in my own mind make it very transactional, even if I just would love to shoot the shit with EJ.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that, EJ? Or are you even seeing that?
Yeah, well, that's definitely great question. So we've made some pretty conscious efforts to do things that kind of help build that culture, build those relationships. Specifically, like ensuring that everyone still has a social budget. And so we've done kind of virtual events with folks, whether that's just kind of a virtual happy hour or it's like a game night, playing Among Us or something. And the teams have been pretty kind of active there in ensuring that as we bring on new employees who never had the chance to work in an office together, that they're able to kind of participate in those and really get to know people kind of outside of the work setting. Additionally, I think once all of this is kind of blown over, we always had a yearly kind of all hands week where we would bring everyone from our non-New York, that's where we're headquartered, outside of New York, to New York for a week. Have meetings, kind of evening social activities, that kind of thing. I'm certainly expecting stuff like that to kind of increase. We might move it to twice a year or something, kind of to ensure that there are opportunities for everyone to, build some of these relationships outside of work, outside of their normal kind of just transactional, as you put it, duties. So it's certainly harder. It's not as organic most of the time, but I think we certainly benefited from having what's called a base layer of folks that already had pretty kind of strong bonds and relationships, and just kind of ensuring that we keep up activities that will allow it to keep those in place and build new ones with our new employees.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, EJ, is like when you go to COVID in March and you have 50 or 100 people having to work there and everyone knows each other. And then you go into COVID and now you're bringing in 20 new people and they don't feel like I'm not in the team or I'm not the clique or I'm not whatever. All these people know each other. I don't know anyone. And that's the challenge, I think, with remote work, is making sure you have this team environment that and they feel like they can know each other and they're comfortable. And when you're comfortable with people, you solve problems better.
Right.
Because you don't feel like, oh, he's going to judge me because I can't get my VPN to work, but I'm a senior engineer. I should know this. Just ask a guy a question and they'll help you out. So
how do you help sort of non-technical stakeholders understand some of these challenges? Do you think they understand it? Are sort of our leadership teams empathetic of some of these challenges and sort of unique challenges? I mean, everybody has a challenge working remote, but there's some very specific sort of, I would say, challenges from a development perspective, especially because developers, while there may be isolated tasks, sometimes everybody has to kind of work together to kind of make it work. It's highly cohesive. Whereas maybe other parts of the organization, sort of individual contributor means literally individual contributor. In an engineering role, individual contributor means you're still part of, a functioning organism that has to all work together. I mean, how does that change? How do you help stakeholders? Do they understand that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fortunately, I think one of the reasons we've been able to, in kind of a in such a successful fashion, is because all the way from kind of the co-founders, CEO on down, there's understanding that these kind of types of relationships, these types of activities are extremely important to the software development process. It is not a solo activity by any stretch. We're kind of a very collaborative organization. It's been in our DNA since the start. And so there's kind of a deep understanding that people need to be working. Even your individual contributors need to be working with not only other individual contributors, their manager, but even outside teams. Dealing with kind of support requests as they come in, working with our help desk, working with our customer success and implementations folks, and creating a cohesive environment there, because when communication breaks down, that's when the problems start. So, there's definitely, I think, understanding from kind of the highest levels that we need to be really promoting this. And that was one of our biggest worries kind of going into this whole pandemic situation, was how do we keep this communication up, these kind of channels open, and ensuring that, we proactively tackle this.
Right.
How do you think, Bobby, like a new engineer kind of coming out or coming into the workplace sort of tackles this? These are all new skills to some degrees we're all having to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like I've said before, I think that you have to have you have to put it in your mind. I need to talk to my dev manager at least every 5 days. And I'm going to call him. I'm going to be proactive because sometimes they're busy, and it's got to be more than an email, especially if you're working remote. I mean, hit the Zoom, hit the Slack call or the Teams call, and make sure you have a conversation with them and just tell them the things you've been doing, and then talk about the problems you're running into, and just be more communicative. And when you work with people in their 20s, which we do a lot going through the boot camp, that is a training session, because you can tell that a lot of them are coming from, especially guys that are coming out of the gaming world or whatever, they've been this way for a long time. And so everything is solo and what I do. And so it's really hard for them to connect personally. And then we just try to train them like, put it on your task list. Just put it on your calendar, call EJ like Friday at 10, and then just make it purposeful. And I think if you do that, you can build relationships. And I think you'll be more successful when you build relationships. And even if you're a rock star coder, if you're this solitary like kingdom builder, and you never share information or you never talk to people, and they just slide pizza on the door and let you code, even the person that's less skilled that can like build all these relationships with the business and EJ and all that, they're more valuable to the organization. And we tell them like, this is how you actually provide value, is giving feedback. They just want to know kind of what you're into, what you're doing, and if they can fix anything for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, one last question then. How do I help my dev managers, my leaders do that? I mean, your great point from Bobby's perspective is sort of put it on the individual contributor to reach out and to be more proactive, which I 100% wholly agree. And I also counsel my individual people to do that. But also, how do you also help the sort of leadership, the dev manager, team lead, become better at that? Before we could walk around the office and sort of talk that way, but now you have to be a little bit more intentional. You have to sort of do things that maybe aren't as fun as a dev manager, which is like setting up a one-on-one with someone. How do you deal with that, EJ? How do you coach your managers towards that? And then love to hear from Bobby as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with kind of said, making sure the ICs are working on their part of this as well, but the dev manager is extremely important as well. And yeah, the coaching that I do certainly is, that's something that I spend time on, is helping people kind of find what works best for them, and strongly encouraging, things like one-on-ones, certainly when new employees start, even encouraging kind of daily check-ins that are, like a video call. Like get on get on the video call, even if it's 5 minutes, check in with the new employee, check in with them, make sure everything's going well. And really, I think encouraging that active reach out, and making sure that there are both deliberate points when they're touching base with all of their people. If it's not on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis, but also making sure that they work with their reports to understand it, and let them know that they should feel comfortable reaching out to them at any time. And kind of from my level, telling my managers that is their most important thing. They need to be focused on their people, that they, as a manager, your output is the output of your people. So, if you're not keeping an eye on that, if you're not working with them to help improve them, help unblock them, and kind of keeping in the loop there, then you're not really doing your job as a manager, or certainly not effectively. So kind of encouraging them to really view their job in that way, I think,
right.
Helps get them in the right mindset where, they're just keeping track of what's going on, need to keep in good touch with their folks to ensure that they can hit delivery goals.
Okay, Bobby, tell us what makes a great dev manager.
I think the dev manager needs to have a daily stand-up that doesn't last for 4 hours. So it truly lasts 15 minutes. I think they give them blocks of time to code. In other words, like I'm running remote teams now, and you just got to have, say like from 9 a.m. to 11, just let them do their job. And also the other thing is, only interrupt them when there's a true emergency. Now, everything can't be an emergency, but like sometimes something's broken, it needs to be fixed. And sometimes dev managers can sometimes overreact to the events of the day when that could have been, you could have solved that at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. It had to be right there at 9:30, 5 minutes after the daily stand up, that lasted for 45 minutes. And so they're just trying, you got to understand, it's like for them to get in the zone, it takes a few minutes to, okay, what was I doing? I think average developer holds between 8 or 9 different things in their brain at once. And then when you interrupt them, that just goes poof, it goes away. And now they're like, okay, where was I? I was right in the middle of implementing this function, which had to have this one. So I was over here doing this one while I'm keeping in mind, like, I need this one. And then someone says, hey, you got a second? I've got an emergency, and it's really not an emergency. So I think like being empathetic to their plight is one thing. And then, like you were saying, sometimes you can check in with them just to see how they're doing. Like, what's going on, find out how are they handling school with kids? How are they, and just keep up with kind of what they're going on in their life. And that way, I think a happy worker is really productive.
That's great. Yeah, I always tell my managers, like, the first thing to ask is not anything about work, right? I mean, who cares about work? I mean, like, what's life like? What's going on? We can get into work later, and look, we'll do work when we're working, right? So that's a good piece of advice. So let me ask both of you a prediction. We're going to round it out here as we kind of end this wonderful conversation we've had. One prediction: what does software development look like 5 years from now? Okay, 5 years from now, AI has finally achieved singularity. What is the role of software engineering and the role of software development 5 years from now? What does that look like? Bobby, let's start with you.
So I think we're in the midst of what I always call this. If you've been around as long as I have, since the 80s, you've seen these major screen shifts. So we went from like centralized computing, like we had mainframes, to desktop, to web, to mobile. And now I think the next computing in 5 years will be something in augmented reality, like glasses. I think that's where it's going, which means that we're going to be focusing on voice control of apps, because we won't have keyboards and mouse necessarily, and they'll wear them around on their headset. And I think as soon as Apple makes a glass that looks like this, that can display screens, I think we'll be building apps that way. So I think in 5 years, that's what you're going to see. It's going to be very much like Minority Report, where you have a HUD up in your screen all day long. And that's how you'll carry your apps around. I think we'll still have some keyboard and mice for sure, doing some other things. But for a lot of the information stuff that we build, I think that's how it's going to be displayed, which means that we got to code things differently, especially around voice and AI.
That's really great. And so, given some of the audio and quality video problems, EJ, what's going to happen when you've got this sort of Apple device on that like buffers for 45 seconds and you're trying to think, but you can't think? What's going to happen? I mean, what do you think of what's going to happen in 5 years?
Yeah, no, it's, given the rate of change we've even seen over the last 5 years, fully expecting it to, be something very different. And I do agree with Bobby there that I think the kind of wearable, the augmented reality type setup will be much more important, especially in our industry. We're making software for first responders who, as you might imagine, generally have their hands busy doing other things than, inputting stuff into the phone or anything like that. So being able to surface information in ways that is relevant and, as you said, doesn't distract, doesn't kind of interrupt them, as well as kind of take input from new kind of avenues, whether that's voice control or think about with kind of the retinal things, maybe we can have some kind of input where you're tracking the eyes, and that's how you select things. It's I think very exciting time, with the advances we have both in AI from kind of the novel methods to I'd say kind of democratization of it in terms of the solutions from companies like AWS and Microsoft that are kind of AI as a service. That'll really open it up to more developers to more easily access this stuff without, say, a PhD in machine learning.
Right. Yeah, I do think data science is going to get way easier to do. So like today, you're looking at TensorFlow and Python and to a less degree C#. But now when you see AWS and Azure, what they're rolling out is I can literally just dump data, pick the type of model I want it to train on, or pick them all, and it'll just train it. And then you write apps. How do I consume those results coming back from AI? And I do think like what he's talking about in police, and he knows this, is like there's going to be a HUD on the dashboard in the car in the windshield because the car may drive itself. There'll be a HUD in the glass. If you had a HUD for a fireman that showed him the layout of the building and it's full of smoke, but he can still see where to go. Those are the kind of things I think you'll see in the next 5 years for sure.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I always say my prediction has been just talking about software development itself. For the last 30 years, we've been banging on keyboards. The way we write code is we think and we bang on keyboards. And that's a big change I think will start to happen. The way we actually build software, the way we construct software, the way we think about putting software together, I think is going to dramatically change. And I do think AI is going to have a big role in that. Today, I have to think about a pull request and I have to think about maybe a CVE security advisory that I got to apply. I think in the future that the sort of software will just sort of understand that and we'll auto patch and we'll do sort of interesting things. It doesn't mean we won't write software. It just means the way we write software will be different and elevated. And I think the machines will help us do a lot more of the construction of software. And that's sort of my prediction. Yeah. Well, with that, it's been a wonderful conversation. I want to be respectful for your time and more importantly, the audience's time. If we want to continue this conversation, I invite everybody to join our Slack community at pinpoint.com/Slack. That'll take you and get you right into our community, as well as buildbettersoftware.org. Where we have lots of great content talking about these topics. And I want to thank both Bobby and EJ for a wonderful conversation and look forward to continue this conversation in the future.